Hey, and welcome. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Got a lot to get to this hour. A little bit later on in the hour, I want to examine the old words of Elizabeth Warren. Remember Elizabeth Warren, this candidate who is now supposedly rising on the strength of her progressive plans and ideas? Well, here's the thing. Back in 2003, when she actually first became prominent, she was a lot more interesting. She's become a lot less interesting. We'll explain why in a little bit. We'll also get to the left's wild inability to even allow for dissenting conversations to happen. It's pretty amazing. We'll get to all of that, but we begin this hour with the fallout from the Odessa, Texas shooting that happened over the weekend. The Odessa Police Department on Sunday identified the man who killed 7 people and wounded 22 others in a shooting spree in West Texas. Apparently, the shooter was pulled over by Texas troopers in Midland on Saturday afternoon for failing to use his signal, police said. He then shot at them with what police described as an AR-type weapon, and then he sped away. Driving on streets and the highway, he sprayed bullets randomly at residents and motorists. He then hijacked a postal truck, ditched his gold Honda. He shot at people as he made his way into Odessa, about 20 miles away, according to CNN. There, police confronted him in a movie theater parking lot and killed him in a shootout. Now, when there's a mass shooting that includes the wounding of a 17-month-old girl and 3 law enforcement officers, you would imagine this would be national news for more than 48 hours, right? Well, now it's Tuesday, and this is completely out of the national news. People have stopped talking about it. Why have people stopped talking about it? Well, it didn't check the boxes necessary for us to continue talking about it. Namely, while the shooting took place with an AR-15 or some AR-type weapon, the shooting could not be attributed to right-wing ideology. It could not be attributed to white supremacy, which the left wants to link to right-wing ideology. Instead, it appears that the motive was purely personal. Not only that, it turns out that there were gun regulations on the books that already prevented this guy from legally getting a gun, so he obtained his firearm illegally. Also, there were 1 million red flags about this guy. So in other words, it cuts against every aspect of the gun control debate pushed by the left. And so the left will just pretend this didn't happen. And it is fascinating to look at the life cycle of mass shooting stories. So if the story fulfills the criteria the media are looking for, namely, it can be blamed either on lack of gun laws, or it can be blamed on some sort of white supremacist or what they like to link to white supremacist right-wing ideology, or if the thing happens to take place with the right sort of weapon, it has to fulfill at least 2 of those 3 criteria, then it remains in the news. If it doesn't fulfill those criteria, then it's not in the news anymore after like 3 days. So if somebody tries to shoot up a congressional baseball game with a handgun, well, it doesn't fulfill several of the criteria, and thus, it does not make the news for more than a week. The guy was left-wing, the guy was carrying a handgun, and there were some red flags about the guy. So that does not fulfill the criteria. Out of the news. If there's a shooting in Sutherland Springs at a church, and the person is stopped by an NRA member, does not fulfill the criteria. So we cannot talk about that for more than a couple of days. Dayton, Ohio, if it turns out that the shooter was not politically motivated and that his politics were on the left, well, then it's out of the news. Within 48 hours, actually, even if it happens the exact same weekend as a shooting in El Paso, Texas. In fact, even the worst mass shooting in American history in Las Vegas, with 60 dead, even that mass shooting is out of the news within a couple of weeks because we can't discern motive. But if you can discern motive, and if the motive can be pinned on anything having to do with Donald Trump or the right, then it stays in the news forever. So El Paso is still in the news. Charleston, South Carolina is still in the news. Right? All of these stories are still in the news because you can try and attribute them to either right-wing failures, or you can try and attribute them to failure, lack of gun control policies. If, however, the criteria are not fulfilled, well, then they drop out of the news immediately. So the Odessa shooting is already out of the news. Why? Well, it turns out there are a bunch of red flags. And not only were there a bunch of red flags, the motive appears to have been personal. So according to ABC News, just a few minutes before the actual shooting, the Odessa shooter actually called the FBI hotline.
For his encounter with the troopers, it was, frankly, rambling statements about some of the atrocities that he felt that he had gone through. He did not make a threat during that phone call. He ended that phone call. After the phone call, we initiated all of our law enforcement procedures, trying to figure out who he was, where he was. Unfortunately, it was only 15 minutes before the trooper was engaged.
Okay, well, so that was red flag number 1. Also, it turns out there were 1,000 other red flags. CNN reported that the next door neighbor had been reporting this guy for a while for being weird, shooting animals and burning them, like all sorts of weird stuff.
He is a 36-year-old white man. A neighbor tells CNN that last month he threatened her with a rifle after she put trash in a nearby dumpster. She says that he would often shoot into his backyard from a structure on top of his house. and then go and retrieve dead animals. She also tells us that she called the police after that incident last month, but claims they never showed up because the property's location doesn't show up on GPS and it's hard to find. As far as a motive, that is still unknown, and the FBI special agent in charge warns we may never know.
Well, according to Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, this dude also failed a background check. He said that there was a background check on the person, and apparently the rifle that was used was obtained illegally, or at least not in consonance with the background check. So this does not fulfill any of the media's desired narratives, and thus it is falling out of the news almost immediately. And attempts to stretch this particular shooting to meet the criteria that can be used as a club against the political right have largely failed. This is how you end up with silly editorials like Marianne Williamson's in the Washington Post. Here's what Marianne Williamson writes about this attack. She says, most politicians stick to a discussion of symptoms only. Politics should be the conduit for our most expanded conversation about societal issues, not the most superficial ones. Conventional politics does not lend itself to a discussion of the deeper issues that plague us. Yet go deeper, we must. America does not just have a gun crisis, it has a cultural crisis. America will not stop experiencing the effects of gun violence until we're ready to face the many ways that our culture is riddled with violence. Okay, well, so far, this is not crazy, but then it starts to go crazy because Marianne Williamson is taking her readings from the astral plane. She says this, quote, our environmental policies are violent toward the earth. Yeah, that's probably it. Let's blame this sucker on fracking. She says, our criminal justice system is violent toward people of color. Pretty sure our criminal justice system prosecutes people who commit crimes. She says, our economic system is violent toward the poor. You mean like a system of mutual consent and exchange is violent toward people who don't make a lot of money? She says, our entertainment media is violent toward women. Our video games are violent in their effect on the minds of children. Oh, so she's going to go here too. She says, our military is violent in ways and places where it doesn't have to be. So she's going to blame our military for this. Marianne Williamson, man. She says, our media is violent in its knee-jerk shaming and blaming for the sake of a better click rate. That part's true. She says, our hearts are violent as we abandon each other constantly, breeding desperation and insanity. Our government is indirectly and directly violent in the countless ways it uses its powers to help those who do not need help and to withhold support from those who do. Our society is not just steeped in violence, we are hooked on violence. And in area after area, there are those who make billions of dollars on deepening the hook. Until we see that, we will have just more violence. So she says that we have to cut our military budget. That's how we're going to fix this, is cut the military. Yes, that'll do it. Why don't we cut the FBI and the police while we're at it, so next time this guy just can run around with his gun and shoot anybody he wants without the cops even showing up. She says that she proposes a U.S. Department of Peace to fix all of this. Again, there's an editorial in the Washington Post, not in Kooky Land Express. She says, I propose a U.S. Department of Peace to coordinate and harness the powers of conflict resolution. Yeah, alternative dispute resolution will probably fix the Kashmir issue. She says, restorative justice, violence prevention, trauma-informed education, mindfulness in schools, child and family wraparound services. I have no idea what that means. Social and emotional learning, and a world-class peace academy to train and to deploy thousands of peace builders. A peace academy to build peace builders. Plus national conferences and a presidential task force for peace creation. Woo-woo. She says, we will make every effort to promote a culture of peace both at home and abroad. We will address the root causes, not just the symptoms of violence in America in time. We will transform our culture from one of conflict to one of peace. Yeah, let's see how this goes with the Taliban. Good stuff. She said, I love the ending to this piece. She says, nothing is going to fundamentally change until enough of us are willing to take a stand for fundamental change. And no change could be more fundamental than for the United States to transform from a culture of violence to a culture of peace. From the frequency of attack to the frequency of forgiveness. From a land of fear to a land of love. Yeah. Well, this makes Joe Biden sound positively sane by comparison. And Joe Biden doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. So Joe Biden tried to jump on the gun control bandwagon this weekend and said a bunch of things that are silly. He suggested that it was time to outlaw all magazines. So I guess we're going to go back to 6-shooters and bolt-action rifles. So Joe Biden is pushing on gun control as well. His idea is to ban magazines. Good luck with this, old Joe.
It has to stop. The idea that we don't have elimination of assault-type weapons, magazines that can hold multiple bullets in them, is absolutely mindless. It is no violation of the Second Amendment. It is it's just a bow to the special interest of the gun manufacturers and the NRA.
Yeah, we're just going to ban magazines. That'll go great. That'll go great. So, in other words, every semi-automatic weapon in the United States will be gone. Beto O'Rourke, by the way, agrees. He says he's going to confiscate your semi-automatic weapons. I'm not sure what these people think being president is, but not this.
How do you address the fears that the government is going to take away those assault rifles, as you call them, if you're talking about buybacks and banning?
Yeah. So I want to be really clear that that's exactly what we're going to do. Americans who own AR-15s, AK-47s, will have to sell them to the government. We're not going to allow them to stay on our streets, to show up in our communities.
Okay, so no, that's not a thing that's going to happen. You know, the belief by Democrats that when they become president, they are just going to do stuff is pretty incredible. It really is. I mean, this belief that the presidency is this sort of dictatorial office where you just enter. Like Kamala Harris keeps saying this sort of stuff. If in the first 100 days I don't get what I want, I'm just going to do what I want and take all the guns. And Beto O'Rourke being like, that's just something we're going to do. We're just going to mandate all of the guns be turned over. Yeah, who and what army, my friend? And if you really think the United States military is going to go along with that sort of thing, you got another thing coming. A lot of those members, they're not going to be turning guns on the citizens of the United States in order to remove their guns from them. That's not a thing that is going to happen. But the left just keeps saying this stuff because they think that it is a sign of strength and power. And again, underlying this is the implicit argument that if you disagree with them on policy, it's because you don't care enough about people who are being shot. Joe Biden does the same routine. He says that Donald Trump knows the right thing to do. He just doesn't have the intestinal fortitude to pass gun control. Or alternatively, maybe he thinks your policies suck, dude.
So no possible solution to deal with this gun issue.
There is a solution.
Next
When?
fall.
I don't see anything out there. Do you? I've seen nothing. The president has no intestinal fortitude to deal with this. He knows better. His instinct was to say, yeah, we're going to do something on background check. What's he doing? Come on. This is disgraceful. This is disgraceful what's happening.
Oh, well, you know, since you say it's disgraceful, that solves the problem. Or perhaps the solutions you're proposing don't actually achieve their policy gains. And this is a particularly bad example of an incident that required more gun control legislation. And this guy was barred from buying new guns. The police had been called on him. But if you have one solution and the solution is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And for Democrats, gun control is always the solution that looks like the hammer, and that means that every problem is the nail. There's only one unfortunate truth. None of that is going to work. None of that is going to help. And the American people, when they're asked about the specifics, they do not agree with Joe Biden and they do not agree with Beto O'Rourke. They're not ready for a mass gun confiscation, nor should they be, because the amount of violence entailed by a mass gun confiscation would vastly outweigh anything that the Democrats would seek to prevent by such a confiscation. Well, I'm so glad that so many college faculties are really making sure to focus in on what they should be doing each and every day. Like, for example, yelling at Chick-fil-A. Seems like if you're going to hire some faculty members, your first requirement was, can they yell at a chicken restaurant? Apparently, at Kansas University, this is a thing. Some faculty members, according to Hank Berrien at Daily Wire, are calling Chick-fil-A a bastion of bigotry, which is weird because Chick-fil-A doesn't discriminate against anybody except for chickens, which they kill and then feed you. They are fighting against allowing America's most popular fast food chain to move from a campus basement to the school's main student center, as well as sponsor the Chick-fil-A coin toss for every home football game. So in other words, we must keep the Chick-fil-A in the basement. It's not even like they're trying to ban it from campus. They just want you to have to walk down to the basement to get your sandwich. The fast food chain has already been operating at KU for 15 years, according to KansasCity.com. Members of the Sexuality and Gender Diversity Faculty and Staff Council, professional useless people, wrote a letter to the university stating, in the spring, we spoke out to denounce the decision to relocate the business, which has a history of supporting organizations that are hostile to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people, families, and communities. The letter names Exodus International, which supports so-called conversion therapy, along with the Family Research Council. The letter cited the leftist Southern Poverty Law Center calling the FRC a hate group. By the way, the Southern Poverty Law Center is a joke and has been a joke for years. The letter sniped, quote, while many Christians are supportive of the LGBTQ community, and many are members themselves, the culture of Chick-fil-A fosters hate and discrimination on multiple levels. Really, how many levels? Like 10? Like 2? What are the multiple? Not the basement level, apparently. So which level are we talking about? Also, there's no evidence that Chick-fil-A actually discriminates against gay people. Okay, the owner of Chick-fil-A is a guy named Dan Cathy, and he has personally donated money to traditional marriage causes. That's not the same as Chick-fil-A, the corporation, supporting traditional marriage causes, or Chick-fil-A, the organization, telling same-sex couples that they can't eat their chicken sandwiches. The staff said, while we recognize that contractual obligations did not allow the complete removal of the brand from campus, we are outraged that they've been allowed to move from the Wesco Underground to a new, bigger, more central location on the University of Kansas campus. Apparently, they want to keep them in the closet. Despite our denouncements and the university's own moves to increase the campus's diversity, equity, and inclusion, KU granted Chick-fil-A a bastion of bigotry, a prime retail location in the heart of our campus. Has anybody ever been to a Chick-fil-A from this group? The so-called Sexuality and Gender Diversity Faculty and Staff Council? I feel like I've walked into a Chick-fil-A before, not to buy anything, but because a friend of mine was buying a chicken sandwich. And I got to admit, when I walked in, I felt the creeping fascism in the form of delicious smelling chicken. And also, I saw people drinking soda. And I was like, whoa, discrimination. I said, bastion of bigotry. Speaking of Chick-fil-A's move to the Memorial Union, the letter stated, quote, the Union was one of the first places on campus to incorporate gender-inclusive bathrooms for the comfort and validation of the experiences and range of identities of the people who walk our halls. So in other words, I guess if Chick-fil-A builds a transgender bathroom, they're okay now? That's how this goes? So, yes on the chicken sandwiches, no on the separate sex bathrooms. The arrival of Chick-fil-A in this building is insulting, counterproductive, and unacceptable. Man, if you're insulted by the presence of a Chick-fil-A, you may have bigger problems than a Chick-fil-A. If you stay up all night because you're like, oh my God, there's a chicken sandwich company that doesn't discriminate against gay people moving into the building next door. What are we going to do? This is like Nazi Germany, guys. Yeah. This is what happens when you give people useless jobs after studying useless subjects for useless years. Turns out they do useless things. College Republicans pointed out, usually any time of day it's packed. Chick-fil-A doesn't discriminate against gay people. Anyone can go in and get their chicken. If you don't like Chick-fil-A, go somewhere else. Yes, this would be the normal way that we do business in the United States, but no longer. Because the goal of the left is, of course, to force everyone and anyone to disassociate from any cause that is remotely not wildly left-wing. Not even right-wing, remotely not left-wing. Another example over the weekend. Andy Lassner is a producer on Ellen's show. Happens to be a nice person. I've dealt with him a couple of times on Twitter. And he had this horrible exchange with Dana Lash, the former spokesperson for the NRA. The exchange went like this. He tweeted, here's the truth. I don't have the answer to the gun problem, the mass shootings. I don't want to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. Many people in my life own guns. But we have a serious problem. We must start talking about gun violence solutions in a bipartisan way. And Dana Lash then replied, okay, here are some solutions. We have to penalize agencies that do not submit all prohibited cases to the NCIC. They're not following the law. Also, we need to stop coddling dangerous offenders in their youth by preventing establishment of criminal records. Okay, and then Andy wrote back something terrible. He wrote back, well, this is definitely a start. Now, normally we call that like a normal conversation, but a Vox writer named Aaron Rupar, who is definitely not just a leftist hack masquerading as a journalist, he then tweeted out, it's silly to earnestly engage with a former paid NRA gun show on the topic of preventing gun violence. How dare you, Andy Lassner, have a conversation with a human like another human would? How dare you do that? So much tolerance, so much diversity from our wonderful compatriots on the left. I can't imagine why political conversation has broken down and why screw you, Trump. I mean, like really, that is the attitude of so many on the right, and I can't blame them because, guys, you're making us crazy because you're acting like crazy jerks. Well, corporate America, there's always talk about corporate America. It's so right-wing, corporate America. So conservative, so evil because it's conservative. And yet, when it comes to woke signaling, corporate America is first on the bandwagon. Why? Well, they figure that people on the right will keep shopping wherever they can get the cheapest product, and people on the left are obnoxious and demand absolute fealty to all of their principles in order for them to shop at their store. Thus, Walmart, which is owned by the Walton family, right, which is a conservative family, they have now decided to dramatically step back from ammo sales after a horrific shooting. CEO Doug McMillon announced the changes. Walmart said on Tuesday it will discontinue all sales of handgun ammunition and sales of short-barrel rifle ammunition that can be used with military-style weapons, following 2 horrific shootings at Walmart stores this summer. It will also stop all handgun sales in Alaska, marking its complete exit from the handguns category. Now, why are they doing this? Because they don't want the bad press. It is that simple. Now, all that is happening is that the press have been ripping on Walmart and anybody else who sells ammo, proclaiming that all of those stores are then responsible for what happens with the ammo, which of course is not true. Nobody suggests that Walmart is responsible for a man beating his wife in the head with a hammer if he got the hammer from Walmart. Nobody suggests that. But because the media have drawn this ridiculous connection, you bought the ammo at one place, therefore they're responsible for what you do with the ammo, Walmart is running screaming away from this particular fray. And this is what the left would like. I mean, what the left would like is for all corporations to bow before them. Now, it does open some market opportunities for competitors. There'll be competitors who then are able to sell ammo. It will drive the price up a little bit until new competitors come into play. But the biggest retailer in the world also is asking customers at Walmart and Sam's Club to no longer openly carry firearms in stores in state where open carry is allowed unless they are authorized law enforcement officers, which definitely will help things. Nothing makes shooters feel more comfortable than walking into a place where nobody else has a gun. So obviously, if you're trying to cut down on shootings, what you should do is make sure nobody looks like they have a gun. Open carry legislation is currently on the books in more than 26 states, according to Dan Bartlett, the executive VP of corporate affairs. Walmart said it won't be changing its policy for customers who have permits for concealed carry. It will be adding signage to stores in coming weeks to communicate the changes. Shares of gun and ammo makers added to losses earlier in the day. All these gun and ammo makers closed down because obviously Walmart is one of their distributors. Walmart shares closed up 0.3% following their announcement, but there will be longer-term effects. This is not the first major company to announce they would no longer be selling ammunition. Other major companies that have done so in the past have seen a bit of a decline because, after all, they're taking marketable product off the shelves. CEO Doug McMillon said in a memo, "We believe the opportunity for someone to misinterpret a situation, even in open carry states, could lead to tragic results. We hope that everyone will understand the circumstances that led to this new policy and will respect the concerns of their fellow shoppers and our associates. We've also been listening to a lot of people inside and outside our company as we think about the role we can play in helping to make the country safer. It's clear to us that the status quo is unacceptable." Oh, you mean the status quo of people buying things, like in a normal way? McMillon also is asking for action on common sense gun measures from the White House and congressional leaders. So they're going to get overtly political now. He's calling on the government to strengthen background checks and remove weapons from those who have been determined to pose an imminent danger. So this is corporations now seeking to avoid public scrutiny by casting it on the government. And you see this from big tech companies also, calling on, for example, the government to regulate First Amendment concerns so they don't have to be blamed for it. Corporations are in the business of risk mitigation. They do not want to have to bear the public relations nightmare of selling ammo and getting blamed by everybody in the media for it. Now, if corporations actually had stones, they would just say, listen, we sell ammo to anybody who is law-abiding. And if the government fails to do the background check, that's on the government. You don't like it? Then very easy solution for you, make ammo illegal and see how that goes in the courts. But corporations don't have the stones for this sort of thing anymore. Most corporations are now in the business of mitigating risk and basically cramming down the left-wing point of view from the corporate level as opposed to from the government level. It's very convenient for everyone. The left gets to claim, correctly, that this is not government-subsidized action. And then the right can't complain because it's a private corporation. But the amount of power that these major corporations have over American life, if they decide to cave to the left, is pretty massive, obviously. So corporations are kind of a quasi-pressured government form almost. They're not government, obviously, and we shouldn't regulate them like they are government. But the left has discovered a weakness in the system, and that is major corporations that control significant swaths of American life being pressured into doing their bidding. The NRA, of course, said that lines at Walmart will soon be replaced by lines at other retailers who are more supportive of America's fundamental freedoms. Beto O'Rourke, of course, would not be bought off. And this is the thing that Walmart doesn't understand. Nobody on the left understands, nobody in corporate America understands this. You can start feeding the crocodile in the hopes it will eat you last. It will still eat you. Presidential contender Beto O'Rourke praised Walmart's decision. He said, "We can't rely on corporations to stop gun violence." Elizabeth Warren said, "Good start, but it's not nearly enough. Walmart can and should do much more. We need real gun reform now." Bernie Sanders said, "I applaud the brave Walmart workers who called on the company to stop selling guns." I love that Bernie Sanders is like, the workers are the ones who did this. Really? Name the workers. It seems like the management did it. He said, "This is a good step, but we still have a gun violence crisis." So in other words, thanks, but no thanks. We don't care. We're still going to yell at you because you're a major corporation. Walmart said its market share of ammo will drop to a range of 6 to 9% falling to the lower end of that range over time. McMillan said, "We know these decisions will inconvenience some of our customers. We hope they will understand. As a company, we experienced 2 horrific events in 1 week, and we will never be the same." Well, you know what would be a good solution to this? For Walmart to hire more security. Obviously, that would be something that would be worthwhile. McMillan said he will be encouraging other retailers to act to make the overall industry safer. I'm sure he will. He would like for other retailers not to compete. He said, "We're exploring ways to share the technical specifications and compliance controls for our proprietary firearm sales technology platform. The system navigates the tens of millions of possible combinations of federal, state, and local laws, regulations, and licensing requirements that come into effect based on where the firearm is being sold and who's purchasing it. We hope that providing this information free of charge will help more retailers sell firearms in a responsible, compliant manner. Walmart in the 90s stopped selling handguns in the U.S. with the exception of Alaska. In 2015, it stopped selling AR-15s. Following Parkland, they stopped selling firearms and ammo to people under the age of 21. So, again, corporate cram-downs taking place here. Customers the ones who are hurt, presumably. And meanwhile, Elizabeth Warren continues to gain in the polls. There's a new poll out today, actually, that is very good news for Elizabeth Warren. Shows her within striking distance of Joe Biden. It is an Investor Business Daily TIPP poll. It shows Joe Biden at 28, Elizabeth Warren at 24, Bernie Sanders dropping all the way down to 12. That is in sharp contrast to a poll last week from Harvard-Harris that had Joe Biden at 32, it had Elizabeth Warren at 13, and Sanders at 16. So the polls are still a little bit all over the place. The spread right now on average is Biden plus 13.5, Warren pulling into second in the Real Clear Politics poll average, but she's the one with all of the media attention. And the media simultaneously want to pay attention to her and encourage people not to attack Elizabeth Warren because she is the great white hope here. Elizabeth Warren is the person that Democrats are counting on to get rid of Joe Biden. Why? Because Biden just keeps gaffing. I mean, the dude cannot stop gaffing. Today, for example, he suggested that details are generally irrelevant. He sounds like AOC, right? Factual truth is no longer necessary. It's moral truth that matters. Here is Joe Biden, slow old Joe, gaffing his way forward.
Not judgment, but details. Because that's something I've heard from some voters, maybe not at your events, but details.
No, but the details are irrelevant in terms of decision-making if, in fact, I forget that it was Rodriguez of all the times. I've been in and out of Afghanistan and Iraq and Bosnia and Kosovo as much as anybody except maybe my deceased friend John McCain and maybe Lindsey Graham. And so the fact that I would forget that it was Rodriguez who was pinning, I believe this is the case, pinning a Bronze Star on a young man, it's irrelevant to the point. It's like saying, I had this very bright reporter and I think her eyes were blue. What difference would it make about whether you were a bright reporter? Your eyes are brown. It's irrelevant, and you know it.
Okay, what is he talking about? No one knows. No, he even screws up the example. Right? He's just gaffing himself all over the place, and this is leading to a lot of enthusiasm for Elizabeth Warren. The funny thing is that Elizabeth Warren used to actually be an interesting character. A long time ago, Elizabeth Warren was actually kind of heterodox and iconoclastic, and now she's just Bernie Sanders warmed over. Okay, so Elizabeth Warren right now is the person of the moment. And this has been a long, steady rise for her. Unlike Kamala Harris, who had that quick bump up into the top tier after debate number 1, Elizabeth Warren has been steadily rising in the Democratic polling, which is good news for her. She's had the kind of build that you want. Bernie Sanders has been receding a little bit. Right now, she has no support in the minority community, but we'll see if the media can build some for her, right? That's the next step here. But here's the thing about Elizabeth Warren. She basically gave up all that made her interesting in pursuit of power, just as a human being. Now, I first met Senator Warren when she was a professor at Harvard Law School in 2004. She had just published a book called The Two-Income Trap, and she was a kind of fascinating character. She was well-regarded as a professor. She was making waves for some of her iconoclastic views. Yes, she was a Democrat by this point, but she had some kind of creative views. And in The Two-Income Trap, she makes a bunch of arguments for conservative policy positions, as circa 2003, 2004. Basically, the premise of her book, The Two-Income Trap, which she wrote with her daughter, was that there are too many American women going bankrupt. Why? Well, it turns out that married women with children were going bankrupt at a shocking rate because her suggestion was tons of women entered the workforce in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and that this led to a steep increase in real estate prices in suburbia because women wanted to live in suburbia for the safety and education of their children. And when you had two incomes, that drove up the price of real estate in these areas. So people started basically living along the lines of a two-income family. Then, when one of the parents lost the income, they went bankrupt, as opposed to a one-income family where people sort of lived up to the income of the one income, right? If you made $50,000 a year, you spent $45,000 a year, for example. Or you went into debt, you spent $60,000 in a year. Well, if somebody lost their job, there were still two people who were capable of getting jobs, right? Mom could actually pick up a part-time job, dad could pick up a part-time job, and now you're making up what you were making before. Whereas if both mom and dad had a full-time income and one of them loses their job, 50% of the income is gone and the other partner can't make that up. So this is what she called the two-income trap. And she suggested some solutions to the two-income trap that are very much at odds with the stuff that she says today. Like, she explicitly argues in her book against, quote, more government regulation of the housing market, slamming complex regulations since they, quote, might actually worsen the situation by diminishing the incentive to build new houses or improve older ones. She argued in favor of school choice instead. She said, the problem of rising home prices is a problem of failure of inner city education and urban education generally. So what was her solution to that? Vouchers, school vouchers. She sounds like Betsy DeVos, as David Brooks points out in the New York Times today. And her heterodox policy proposals didn't stop there. In 2003, 2004, Elizabeth Warren, quote, refused to join the chorus calling for taxpayer-funded daycare on its own. She called that a sacred cow. Now, of course, she calls for mandatory taxpayer-funded daycare. She suggested that government-subsidized daycare would add one more indirect pressure on mothers to join the workforce because now you'd be rewarded for leaving your kid in daycare as opposed to staying home with your kid. She ardently opposed additional taxpayer subsidization of college loans, too. She called for a tuition freeze from state schools. So, no, we're not going to pay off your student debt. No, we're not going to make loans easier to get. We are instead going to force colleges to freeze tuition and then spend less, which sounds like kind of a conservative policy, does it not? Here's a direct quote from her book, 2003, The Two-Income Trap. This is Elizabeth Warren. Now, not me. Okay, quote. We haven't suggested a complete overhaul of the tax structure. We haven't demanded that businesses cease and desist from ever closing another plant or firing another worker. Nor have we suggested that the United States should build a quasi-socialist safety net to rival the European model. That's Elizabeth Warren, circa 2003. Well, now, Elizabeth Warren is running as warmed over Ralph Nader or Bernie Sanders. She's really climbing in the polls right now, and the media are propping her up. I mean, they are giving her Beto-like attention. They are giving her early Pete Buttigieg-like attention. She is the greatest, the wisest, the most powerful, the fairest of all beings. Yes, that's a quote from Lord of the Rings, the movie. In any case, Elizabeth Warren is just the most wonderful. She has so many plans, man, like plans up the wazoo. So many plans, they'll make your head spin. Plans upon plans. Well, all of her plans are basically Bernie Sanders garbage. So much so that Biden advisors are basically advising him to just clock her in the next debate, which should be amusing, frankly. One of the Biden advisors is openly saying that she has to be called out. Biden surrogate Dick Harpootlian, which is a great name, Harpootlian, he told Politico, quote, she's promised about $50 trillion worth of benefits in the last 30 days. Her economics are a fraud. At some point, somebody's going to point that out. She's a multimillionaire professor at Harvard. She can't rail against the 1%. She is one of the 1%. True. Harris surrogate Bakari Sellers told Politico, I think at the end of the day, the biggest criticism of Elizabeth Warren is her inability to make her actual plans reality. There are a lot of voters, especially black voters, who will say, a lot of this is pie in the sky. We want pie on the table. Fair. Okay, but what made Elizabeth Warren into this? Because she used to be practical and interesting. She used to be one of the people who stumped for school vouchers and stumped against subsidies for tuition and suggested that the way to bring down tuition costs would be to stop government subsidies of said tuition costs. True. Fact check, true. Well, what happened? Well, what happened is that the left fell in love with her because of all her talk about cracking down on the credit industry. So as part of the two-income trap, like the last third of the book, she talks about castigating the credit industry. Now, some of the stuff she talks about is perfectly fair. She talks about deliberate obfuscation in credit contracts so you don't know what exactly it is that you're taking out when you take out a credit card. She talks about the fact that certain subprime mortgages were pushed on people who didn't actually need a subprime mortgage. Right? This was, some of this is true. But then she decided that she was going to reinstate state usury laws, which would basically cut off access to credit, cut off access to payday lenders, heavily regulate the banking industry. This is the stuff that made the left fall in love with her. Well, in 2007, 2008, she pushed very hard for the creation of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. When Barack Obama became president, he created the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which was this wildly powerful, independent of the executive branch, executive agency, in which the person who was appointed for a term and could not be fired by the president, was the basic idea. It wouldn't be bipartisan. It would be a Democrat staffed by other Democrats. And she really, really wanted to run the CFPB. This was her life goal, was to run the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Barack Obama thought about appointing her in 2009, and Republicans were like, nope, not going to do it. So in 2009, 2010, she was rejected from the CFPB. The result? She lost out on that job, and she decided, you know what, screw this, I'm running for Senate. And when I'm running for Senate, I'm going to run to the hard left because I can't make friends with the Republicans anymore. I'm just not going to do it anymore. So she is going to run as Ralph Nader 2 with the feminist narrative to boot. And so that is her new image. Her new image is this hardcore Bernie Sanders, Ralph Nader type, even though her earlier career was kind of interesting. Now, the great irony is the stuff that would actually make her pretty electable in a general election is all the stuff that she now refuses to talk about. If you actually read the forward, the new forward to this particular book, you can see that I actually highlighted sections of it so I know of which I am speaking. When you read the new intro by Elizabeth Warren and her daughter, Amelia Warren Tiagi, the new intro is simply boilerplate. It pretends the rest of the book doesn't exist. The whole thing is about how banks are terrible and how progressive big government policies are the solution. Everything that she ever said has basically been thrown out the window in favor of precisely the kind of stuff that wins you Democratic primary votes in Iowa and New Hampshire, but loses you general election votes. So this is the great irony of the modern Democratic Party. Elizabeth Warren of 2003 would go nowhere. Elizabeth Warren of 2019 can't even look sideways at Elizabeth Warren of 2003. Like, never the two shall meet. It's never going to happen. So how is Elizabeth Warren going to fare in these primaries? Well, again, with this kind of media attention, it's hard to see her doing worse than second. This is quickly turning into a two-person race. And as the debates shape up next week, because the next big debate is next Thursday, it'll be fascinating to see if Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren go at it. Elizabeth Warren's strategy so far has been to avoid all conflict of all sorts. And so far, she's been able to do it. Bernie Sanders strangely refused to go after her at all in last time's debate. Instead, they sort of talked beyond themselves. They talked about Joe Biden and the Republicans, but they didn't talk to each other at all. I think that Sanders is sort of waiting in the wings, hoping that Biden will clock Warren, and the two of them will Mario Kart each other out of the race. And they'll basically nail each other on the side of the Indy 500, and he'll just cruise through the inside track. That is unlikely to happen. Biden, however, must at some point here go after Warren, because as she continues to build momentum, it's going to be difficult for him to stop her, especially if Warren begins to make any inroads at all into the minority vote share. Right now, Joe Biden owns that minority vote share. He's already downplaying. There are a lot of bad problems for Joe Biden in this campaign. I've been saying since the beginning that Joe Biden's best day would be his first day. Right now, there are already headlines about how he's setting up a firewall in South Carolina. Here's the thing about political firewalls. They always get breached. Also, Biden's advisors are now playing down expectations. They're insisting that the primary campaign will become a long slog, not an inevitability campaign. Well, that is not good for Joe Biden. If this is seen as a battle for Joe Biden, then in the end, he probably loses. But all that's going to be dependent on if Joe Biden makes a big boo-boo with minority voters. Because right now, the only thing holding him up is the perception of Barack Obama. At a certain point, Barack Obama is either going to have to endorse Biden or watch as Elizabeth Warren steals the nomination from Biden. That's my prediction at this point in the race. Okay, we'll be back here tomorrow with much, much more content. We'll bring you all of the latest on news and politics. So have yourself a wonderful, calm evening. We'll be back here tomorrow to recap all of it for you. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.